Alright, so Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. I just want to put up front, this isn't a spoiler-free review. I'll do a spoiler-free version right now for you real quick. As a piece of just escapist sci-fi fantasy, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania has a fair little bit to offer, but it is a film that's pretty disinterested in its characters. And all of the film's themes and just the character motivations all feel like they've been snipped short. It's a film that feels like it's been massively simplified. But if you want my recommendation, should you see the film, well, if you have even the slightest inkling of interest in it, I say go see it and form your own opinion. You might think I'm talking absolute bull honky. And you know what? If you do, that means things worked out for you, so I say go see it for yourself. But as for the rest of this video, it is going to be getting spoilery. Because I really want to properly talk about this one, you know?
Hello there, I'm Captain America, and I'm here to give you a PSA. Now, if you love your country, you'll want to subscribe to Channel Pup. If you don't love your country, well, that's just too bad. But you can still subscribe anyway. Commies welcome. And of course, actually, we'll talk about that. But of course, nothing comes free in this country, except for freedom. And no exception is the Adobe subscriptions that Channel Pup needs to make these videos. So be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description below. And God bless America. Enjoy the video.
So the Ant-Man movies have always kind of released in a pretty odd place. Like the first Ant-Man was the final film of Phase 2. And then the second one released just between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. I mean, also Captain Marvel's in there too, but that wasn't exactly very well received, was it? But the point is, people weren't really in the mood to watch an Ant-Man movie at that time. Now, in terms of my thoughts on previous Ant-Man movies, the first Ant-Man was a really cool film. I loved how, you know, with the first Ant-Man, it was all about how the mundane could become fantastical. It's like, you know, Ant-Man might just be running through an apartment, but because it's like through the POV of an ant-sized man, it's really cool. And the way all that stuff was shot, the visual effects look stunning. It had a really strong supporting cast as well, with obviously Michael Payne as Louis being quite a scene stealer. And obviously this film was meant to be directed by Edgar Wright, but of course due to creative differences, Edgar Wright stepped down, was replaced by Peyton Reed, but you can still feel Edgar Wright's influence in that first film. Moving over to the second one, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Edgar Wright's presence is just nowhere to be found here. And unfortunately, it ends up being one of the weaker MCU films. It feels very run off the mill. I had a very, very basic level of engagement with it. I found the film to be offensively inoffensive. Like, really, just nothing of note to really speak about in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And like, if it sounds like I'm being kind of vague about it, it's because I've already freaking forgot the movie, and I have no inclinations to rewatch it for this review. So, yeah. Admittedly, there is quite a bit working against Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. It's one of the only 4 MCU projects to have a rotten score on the Rotten Tomatoes, including Iron Fist, Inhumans, and Eternals. Ant-Man and the Wasp was as dull as it was, so that reduced my interest in the character somewhat. And I guess my interest in Marvel is just generally lower now than it was 5 years ago. I've got a case of that post-Endgame disengagement. You know, Endgame was such a jumping-off point for a lot of people, because at that point it felt like a lot of stories had met their logical end. And just, yeah, when it comes to the Marvel Universe proper, the Marvel Universe on this grand scale, it's like, oh, if we're really trying to, you know, outdo Endgame already, it's just exhausting. It's not helped by the fact that there's just a massive oversaturation of Marvel as well, with way too many shows and way too many movies releasing year to year, and there's been a clear focus on quantity rather than quality. With that being said, while I have been fairly negative on Phase 4 in my videos, I think the Phase 4 film track record is a bit stronger than the shows, which often suffer from really poor pacing and just really bad attention to detail in the writing. This stuff might have been affected by COVID, maybe it wasn't. I honestly am kind of past the point of excusing it though. I'm also just generally disinterested in the multiverse saga. The most interesting concept that this multiverse had to offer was a Spider-Verse. We've already done that. That's done now. And even the idea of the Spider-Verse could be nearing oversaturation. As, like, you know, obviously we had Into the Spider-Verse, which wasn't an MCU project. We then had Spider-Man No Way Home, which was the MCU Spider-Verse project. And now we're getting Across the Spider-Verse as well. Don't get me wrong, I really love Spider-Man. I really love these movies. But that could be pushing it on the oversaturation front for Spider-Verses. And if I start getting tired of Spider-Man, that's an absolute death knell for superhero cinema for me. But the MCU, it's taking on concepts that are so large that they no longer have tangible and relatable stakes. Doing this multiverse thing only makes this worse because it means that we're seeing certain characters again that had good conclusions already, and like, yes, the justification is, oh, different universe, different timeline, but it's like, keep your hand out the cookie jar, Marvel, you know? The MCU's always had a mortality problem with characters just dying to come back, and we are seeing so much of that in Phase 4 as well. Between Vision and Loki, and maybe these things were set up by the original Avengers Endgame. But again, it's one of those things where if that were an ending, it wouldn't matter so much. I'm not necessarily saying I want the MCU to end, because it's a good thing to grow up with, it's a good thing to have around. But it is one of those things where they need to do more to re-establish actual stakes in this universe. Actual compelling and convincing stakes, tangible ones, life or death stakes. But when they keep going bigger and bigger, we are further and further divorced from the humanity that made these films work in the first place. So another thing that Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania has working against it is that this movie is supposed to introduce us to the big bad of the multiverse saga, who was actually already introduced in Loki, being Kang the Conqueror, or as he was in Loki, He Who Remains. This is the first film of Phase 5 set to lay down the groundwork of the MCU ahead. And it was very much marketed as this start of a new dynasty. You had all of the MCU reviewer sock puppet accounts saying how Kang is gonna be the next Thanos, and director Peyton Reed saying it's gonna feel like Ant-Man stumbled into an Avengers status movie as the main character role, and is gonna change everything. Like, pretty much every project throughout Phase 4, this is gonna change everything. It's exhausting, and that is really working against my enjoyment of these movies, and would have been working against my enjoyment of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. But as a movie in its own right, if you don't really care about any of that stuff, you're indifferent, or you're just fine with it, then the movie's fine. It's a good time. If you're kind of checked out, this movie might actually be a little more for you than it is for those who are actually invested in this story, because it kind of mishandles it a little. And by a little, I actually mean quite a fair margin. Listen, if you are super invested in this overarching story of the multiverse saga and Kang as the next Thanos, then this chapter is going to prove to be wafer thin. You're probably going to be very disappointed. For me, though, as someone who is fatigued by the overarching story, yeah, it did work out for the better, because I kind of enjoyed it as a piece of escapist fantasy, you know? And again, it's incredibly simplified. The marketing of this film, though, yeah, it was absolutely obnoxious, hyping it up as the start of this new dynasty and Kang as this next Thanos, and the movie really doesn't do a good job with that. Getting into the movie itself, you've got, like, the Ant-Man family. You've got Scott Lang, you've got Cassie Lang, his daughter, you've got Hope van Dyne, Janet van Dyne, who was previously trapped in the quantum realm, and Hank Pym, and they're all trapped in the quantum realm. And they need to get out without setting Kang free, because he's a very dangerous dude. And this film is gonna be the prelude to the Kang dynasty, right? Well, nah, yeah, this film itself is pretty self-contained, and Kang does end up pretty interchangeable. Really, the only major setup for the Kang dynasty are the post-credits scenes. But let me back up. Scott and Cassie, they have a nice father-daughter dynamic. But the whole wanting his time back, Scott wanting his time back with his daughter that he missed out on. This idea that was quite prevalent in the marketing as like the human core of the movie, amounted to a little more than a throwaway line from Kang. And that is pretty disappointing, because I feel like the idea of a film where a lot of Scott's motivations hinge on him wanting his time back with Cassie would have been much more interesting than the very simplified version we got, where Scott is just very protective of her, but in a way that any father would be. Or any good father would be anyways. Cassie is brought along for the journey, and she ends up being one of the film's stronger assets, as she is a good character, and ends up being the heart of this film. She's integral to every part of this. Now, elephant in the room, we are now on, I believe, Cassie number 3 in terms of the recasting. But Kathryn Newton, I have to say, she does a nice job in the role. I've heard some people saying she was really bad. I didn't really get that. I thought she was fine. And the film starts off well. It's just in the normal world, the regular everyday, and, you know, it's actually quite nice just to see how Peyton Reed has directed just the regular world segments, like making Scott Lang feel like kind of this everyman. There's a lot of funny jokes with dogs in there, people wanting Scott to take pictures with their dogs. There's a bit where the shop clerk refers to Scott as Spider-Man, and these bits did have me chuckling. Scott is kind of relishing in his status and reputation as this universe-saving hero, and to be honest, why shouldn't he? And then we juxtapose that with Cassie, who's very young, she's very progressive. She thinks Scott should be doing more. Cassie takes part in protests. She gets arrested, and she's pretty based. She shrinks down a police car to help out some protesters. Now, I did worry a little bit about where they were taking their dynamic in the first act, with Cassie kind of getting a little too far under Scott's skin in some ways. Scott would be like, oh, Cassie, you need to be careful. Your future could be at stake. And Cassie's just like, yeah, what have you done, old man, huh? What have you done since Endgame? Since saving the... Okay, you saved the universe. What else you got? Yeah, that's right. You just crawl back to your hole, Scott. God, you're nothing. You're no one. I hope you die. It doesn't exactly play out like that, but like I was like, whoa, Cassie, go easy on him. Fortunately, though, that is kind of put aside once it's revealed that she and Hank have been working on a means of communicating with the quantum realm. That actually, now that I run that back, that kind of comes out of nowhere, but I swear in the film, it's like they got a secret project going on, and like Hank Pym's like the cool uncle kind of thing. But the idea of communicating with the quantum realm is an idea that Janet Van Dyne is firmly against for kind of obvious reasons. She was trapped in there for 30 years. That would have you traumatized, and she hasn't said anything about it since, but she is just firmly against this. She tries to put the kibosh on the whole operation, but inadvertently ends up getting everyone sucked into the quantum realm, which is where the vast majority of this film takes place. Now, why was she so against this idea? It could be quite compelling to chalk it up to the trauma of being trapped in there for 30 years, missing out on her own time. Living in a world so divorced from your own for 30 years has to mess you up. It's really because Kang was down there. That's where the villain is. And he manipulated her into helping him to get his multiverse traveling chair back in order. But she betrayed him at the last minute and was able to escape, with Kang just taking his prison and turning it into his empire. Kinda cold. So Scott just wants to get out of there, you know, get everyone back to the real world, but Cassie wants to liberate everyone from Kang's tyranny. Oh, you little rabble-rouser, you. And it's here where we learn a little bit about Janet's past as a freedom fighter in the quantum realm. This is where Bill Murray just about factors in as her former love interest, who I can't name because I don't remember his name. He ends up being so arbitrary. His whole thing, his whole purpose in this film is to be just one massive cuck joke at Hank Pym's expense. It's played off relatively tastefully, but it's still like, it's very much the joke is, oh, I was with someone else for a bit, I was also with someone else for a bit, and it's like, you know, they're 30 years apart, I get it. What you end up with at its bare bones is a film involving Ant-Man, the Wasp, Cassie, Hank, and Janet all venturing into a secret dimension under an oppressive dictatorship, and that idea in itself is pretty cool. It's still a far cry from what made the first Ant-Man so great, but I think it's safe to say that ship's now sailed. We're not going to be doing the spectacle in the mundane anymore. We are firmly going in the direction of sci-fi fantasy now. That's Marvel for you. The wheels keep on turning, their universe keeps on moving, and the concepts need to constantly get bigger and bigger, whether or not it results in a better movie. And what we end up here is effectively kind of a family-focused Star Wars movie with characters that can change their sizes. We still haven't really returned to the sheer spectacle of Ant-Man's shrinking and growing powers. These are still simply relegated to abilities, so yes, even with this far bigger scope, which is ironically subatomic, more could still be done with Ant-Man's powers than is being done here. I'm also just going to say this is the best Star Wars movie since Rogue One. Now, I do think the film did struggle quite a bit with finding things for the Langs and Pym to do, and a lot more could have been done with exploring the trauma of Janet Van Dyne. These characters fortunately never feel intrusive. Heck, I really enjoyed all of Hank Pym's scenes. He remains an MVP, but the justification for them being there is just wafer thin this time around, and we barely explore them. Cassie, as mentioned before, she's a pretty solid reflection of that sort of young idealist, quite politically charged, who wants to make the world a better place, despite some moments in the first act of it being a bit unlikable. The problem here is just that the character themes feel so handicapped. The idea of Scott lamenting the time lost with his daughter is great, but it just amounts to, where's Cassie? Is Cassie alright? Man, I sure do love my daughter. Isn't Scott such a special guy? He loves his daughter. Now, in terms of the quantum realm itself, it is nowhere near as mysterious, scary, oppressive, ironically enough, as the one that we saw in the first Ant-Man very briefly. But I'll say this, I was pleasantly surprised, because I was worried that we would be getting pure green screen visual vomit like, say, Thor: The Dark World. And while, yes, the majority of it is still CGI, I was quite pleased to see the use of some practical sets. And to some extent, the overall design of the quantum realm had some thought put into it, with some sense of geography. There's definitely further they could have gone with it, and I will say this, the sound design, the hell happened? There are so many shots where you can see lava waterfalls in the background and just all kinds of things that should produce noise. Logically they would, but they just don't. The sound design was just oddly lackluster this time. I don't know. I feel like better sound design would have, contributed a lot to making this world feel a lot more tangible. But okay, yeah, we got lava waterfalls that don't make a sound, fair enough. They had inventive ideas such as like living buildings and an all-liquid organism whose ooze can be drank and works as like an auto-translation. And the ooze guy is played by David Dastmalchian, who played Kurt in the previous film. He's been recast here as Kurt doesn't make any appearances. Sadly, Michael Pena, though, is nowhere to be seen in this film. Not even in the Earth scenes. I don't, like, Lilly was kind of integral to those Ant-Man movies. They were integral to their identity in the grand scheme of things. Just a cameo or something? Not even a cameo? The side characters that we have in the quantum realm feel like something out of Monsters, Inc., unfortunately. Like, we could have seen them a tad more fleshed out, but, like, what we have here is, like, if you like Monsters, Inc. side characters, you'll probably enjoy these guys. It's one of those things where that Disney identity is just bleeding into all of this. They act like Disney characters, they talk like Disney side characters. Particularly, like, all the jokes about how, like, Scott as a human being has holes in him, like, he's got, like, 7 holes. And the ooze guy has no holes, and in typical MCU fashion, because you said the thing at the beginning of the movie, that means you gotta say a thing at the end of the movie. And he gets shot to bits like, I have holes! I was like, I feel like I'm watching Monsters, Inc. And don't get me wrong, I kind of like the little ooze guy. As you can probably tell, I'm quite conflicted on this movie. But again, like, such a simplified character. Everything here is so simplified. Then we have our baddies. Okay, let's talk the baddies. The main guy being Kang. Kang, a lot of the advertisement of this hinges on Kang. Kang's the big deal. And I have to say, he's a wonderfully threatening and manipulative presence. However, Jonathan Majors is doing pretty much all of the legwork to sell this here. When it comes to Kang as this multiversal threat, you really have to take the character's word for it. You get some incredibly vague visual flashbacks of Kang attacking people, but like, if you haven't already seen Loki, there's really nothing to back up the idea that he is this multiversal threat. Sadly, much of what makes Kang distinct from other villains from a writing standpoint, this Thanos-level threat, is all just done through dialogue. He'll tell us how many worlds he's conquered, how many rebellions he's destroyed, how many Avengers he's killed. But again, you have to take his word for it. Unfortunately, he doesn't quite come out swinging like Thanos did as far as this dude's first outing as the main villain goes. Like, when Thanos was the main villain, the first thing he did was beat up the Hulk. Kang, on the other hand, is like, I have killed so many Avengers, conquered so many multiverses, aren't I just the worst? Kang also gets quite a bit less convincing though, when you consider that we're dealing with a villain here who's already been defeated. This is Kang Prime, a Kang so crazy he was exiled in the quantum realm by the Council of Kangs. He's been exiled by characters we've never met. But also, this Kang, the second Kang that we're meeting after He Who Remains, who also got killed. This is a very beatable Kang, and he's supposed to be the worst of all the Kangs. And particularly in the third act, there are moments where he's yelling about how rebellions are nothing new to him. But if that's the case, why are you so visually upset? He's shown to be this ruthless guy, and we're supposed to believe that he's smart too, always a few steps ahead, yet he's given so many chances to kill Cassie on the spot, to kill Scott on the spot, to kill Hope on the spot, and instead he decides to go with a dramatic approach and do a speech. If this is all like so Monday to Friday for you, why you gotta be so dramatic? Now this is like nothing special when it comes to movies, but it does make Kang a far less credible threat when there are clear opportunities for him to win that he's just not taking. You absolute toilet brain. Kang's not a bad villain. I'd say he's in the upper echelon of MCU villains in some ways, but he's definitely not selling me as this new Thanos kind of deal. Jonathan Majors is the absolute best thing about this character. He himself delivers a chilling performance, and as the mid and after credits indicate, Kang's multiversal counterparts are going to be a series of unique Jonathan Majors performances. I kind of feel like they should lead with this rather than, oh, this is going to be the next Endgame event. Whoa, look, it's the multiverse. Lead with how good Jonathan Majors is and like how different he's going to be in these roles. I'm more excited to see what Jonathan Majors does with this multi-performance than I am any of this whole multiverse shtick, which really makes me want to rent out a load of Jonathan Majors movies more than it makes me want to see what's coming next from the MCU. But then the threat ahead is really just like, oh, we've killed off Kang in this film, but now there's a lot of Kangs and they're all conspiring. So the big threat is that there's more of him. Okay, so it's like, you know, you had one Kang here. What's the threat for the Avengers movie? 2 Kangs. Jesus Christ, count the Kangs. 1. What's next? 2. This is a big problem with this film. No matter how enjoyable I found it, it's a problem that Kang is actively less scary after Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania than he was before it, as he's proven to be pretty beatable by this point. He gets killed off. He gets killed off by Scott. And aside from the exposition, we're given very little compelling evidence that he will live up to the hype. As I say, Jonathan Majors is absolutely carrying this role. The sad thing is, in this film, you could replace Kang with any other character who's all about conquering. Any other MCU villain that wants to take over the world, you could just swap them out. Then we have Kang's right-hand man, MODOK, making his cinematic debut. Now, MODOK is a character I was really excited for this film. Maybe even more so than Kang. See, MODOK is not a character I ever took for granted. There is an art to translating a character from page to screen. And MODOK is a tough sell. A giant head with tiny little limbs and a floating metal throne. At the same time, MODOK is in many ways the ultimate Marvel body horror character. A scientist experimented on by AIM to become an organic human supercomputer. A physical abomination with a swollen head confined to his throne as he sits in agony, tormenting people with his telepathic powers. As silly as this guy looks, like, there is potential there. So, how did MODOK fare up for his first cinematic appearance? Well, I remember when we got our first look at his metal face, and I thought, oh, you pussies, come on, do the big head. Well, they did it. And I feel like it's so strange, because I don't think I've ever seen a cinematic superhero character design adaptation be so element to element dead on to the comics while completely evoking a different feel, while having a completely different effect. This is a suitably different feel, though, because this is not MODOK in the slightest. This isn't George Tarleton, the AIM scientist experimented on become a human supercomputer. He's not the ruthless would-be dictator able to make people's heads explode with a thought. This is Darren Cross with a big head. Remember Darren, the yellow jacket? His body got all distorted when he was sent to the quantum realm, and Kang gave him his throne and used him as like a right-hand man. This MODOK is not super clever. He doesn't make people's heads explode. There's no body horror, so to speak of. He's just a man that floats around being all awkward and silly. The visual effect of this swollen head is clearly rubbing some folks up the wrong way, but I must say, I'm kinda relieved that Marvel didn't go an entirely CGI route, instead choosing to distort footage of Corey Stoll's face. I think we could have gone further down the body horror route with some prosthetics and makeup maybe, but that's clearly not what they're going for here. This is basically like Kang. The big bad of this film has a Mr. Potato Head for a sidekick that he sometimes tosses about. He's played up entirely for laughs. He's a complete reinterpretation of the character that has very little in common with his comic book counterpart. Also, it's safe to say this man has one of the funniest death scenes I've ever seen. It's utterly silly, but him telling Scott he's like a brother to him and how he died an Avenger, it's a meme. And it's sad. Genuinely sad Not because I'm sad to see MODOK go, but it's sad to see so much potential wasted in the name of comedy. But I won't lie, I was laughing. It is funny. Humor is very subjective, so I can only be purely subjective in when I say this, but like, Thor Love and Thunder, you know, flushed away a lot of great potential story in the name of comedy. But the problem there was I just didn't find it funny. Here, okay, I'm laughing, so it's immediately several steps above Thor Love and Thunder. I think, you know, it's really bizarre how the MCU has some villains like, say, Mysterio, who are handled incredibly lovingly. And then you get some like Taskmaster from Black Widow, who I think do work in their own right, but boy do I feel sorry for their fans who have waited years for their cinematic debuts. MODOK is firmly in the Taskmaster camp of MCU villains, and while he is a lot of fun on his own terms, dare I say my favorite thing in this film, just he's so ridiculous that I can't not love him. He's just like me, for real. Look at him, he looks like me. I do lament the missed potential. I think MODOK in many ways sums this movie up perfectly. He's the perfect allegory. I don't hate Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. In fact, I thoroughly enjoyed my experience. As a Star Wars meets Journey to the Center of the Earth piece of escapist fantasy, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania went down smoothly for me. I enjoyed the creative concepts here, and visually, in spite of a few ropey moments, it's eye candy. But I can't help but lament the missed potential. How much deeper we could have gone with these characters, with the quantum realm, which is nowhere near as mysterious and scary as it was the first time we saw it, which basically just ends up being some goofy sci-fi universe. These incredible concepts, like the quantum realm, like Kang, like MODOK, like Scott wanting back his time with Cassie, like Janet's PTSD and guilt, are completely half-baked across the board. And in the end, what we get out of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is just that. That's all, folks. It's a light serving that was advertised by both previous films and its own publicity as a massive event. But sadly, rather than put on that massive show that was promised, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania gives us a peek behind the curtain for what's to come for Phase 5, and so far, this is a very hollow act. That's not to say that Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is devoid of strong moments or strong character moments. The scene where Scott gets caught up in the probability storm and all of his different probabilities create an anthill to lift him up, and he's rescued by Hope? That's a really cool scene. It could have been even better were it backed up by a film that focuses on the humanity of its characters rather than the funny spooky ookies and the franchise baiting. Also, the final fight between Scott and Kang, excellent. I loved seeing this more violent side to Scott, where he was just ready to go fisticuffs with Kang and got his ass handed to him. But he's doing everything he can to avoid Kang escaping into our world. Even though the stakes are undercut a little by Kang's suit no longer functioning as well as his conquest chair, so when you think about it, it'd just be an everyday schnook, right? I don't think Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is by any stretch an outright bad movie. It certainly has a lot of interesting style and visuals to offer. But this film, like Ant-Man and the Wasp before it, the second one, just doesn't aim high enough with its themes and characters, and it's pretty egregious for it. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania suffers from many of the same issues that dogged its predecessor, Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second one. Except now, it's covered in visual spectacle. Rather than enriching its characters, there's just more of them now. As an Ant-Man movie, we have strayed so far from what made the original Ant-Man so good. As a prelude to our big Avengers team-up with a big threat, well, what do I even call this? Is this supposed to be Phase 5's quasi-Infinity War? It feels like it wants to be. Director Peyton Reed did say he wanted to feel like Ant-Man had stumbled into a solo role in an Avengers movie, but if that's the case, this is probably the most half-baked Avengers movie to date, sleepwalking its way into cinemas. Again, I don't think it's a bad movie, I just think it's a frustrating movie because Marvel Studios have an incredible toy box of IPs and characters to play with. They've got the budget, the resources, and the support to literally put anything on screen, and they have an audience that is willing to watch anything they make. They are in the absolute prime spot. They are front and center in the cinematic zeitgeist. Whether or not they should be is a different matter, but they are. And what we have here is a film that aims so low a film so complacent that while I may have enjoyed it as a piece of escapist fantasy, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is a tricky film to defend. So, try again, Marvel. Oof, okay, well that was a very conflicted piece. What do you guys think? Have you seen Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania? I certainly hope so, given how spoilery I got, jeez. But the floor is yours in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys think, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. I say, you've made it to the end of the video! Congrats. No, but seriously, thanks a bunch for watching. And just now, I'll be extending a special thanks to the patrons in the $10 tier, who are
Adam Myers, Ken K, Legendary Ray Ray, Mr. SP, Sergio, That Jordo, and Where's Arnold? What an amazing and generous bunch of people. Thank you guys so much for your support. And if you want to join the ranks of these amazing people right here, the link to my Patreon is in the description below. Guys, these are not the easiest times in the world financially, so every little bit you folks are donating is doing wonders. I really would love to be able to do YouTube as a proper fully fledged career someday. It might just be a pipe dream, but maybe you guys can prove some people wrong. But of course, if donations aren't your thing, then, well, it means plenty to me that you just hit that cute little subscribe button over there. I didn't mean hit that way. Well, that's me done for today. Thanks a whole bunch for your support, and have a fantastic day. I'm gonna see you so soon.